I sat stunned at the conference table, 20 pairs of eyes suddenly fixed on me as my presentation slides still glowed on the screen behind Mr. Davidson. For years at this company, countless late nights, missed birthdays, and postponed vacations, all for this project that I'd poured everything into. The room fell into uncomfortable silence as he leaned forward, tapping his pen against my printed proposal, and said without lowering his voice, "You're just not good enough for this level of responsibility." The promotion letter I'd already received from his boss last week lay hidden in my desk drawer, making this public humiliation all the more bewildering. I felt my face flush, but I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't break down. Instead, I met Mr. Davidson's cold stare with unwavering calm. "Thank you for your feedback," I said, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest. "I'll certainly take that into consideration." Mr. Davidson blinked, clearly expecting tears or stammered excuses. He'd seen it before. He had a talent for reducing employees to emotional wrecks during these quarterly reviews. But I wasn't giving him that satisfaction. Around the table, colleagues shifted uncomfortably. A few avoided eye contact altogether, staring intently at their notepads or phones. Others exchanged quick glances, surprised by my composure. In the corner, Melissa, Davidson's assistant, actually looked disappointed. "Well," Davidson continued, clearing his throat, "I think we've seen enough. Perhaps someone with more experience should take the lead on this project moving forward." He glanced meaningfully at Derek, his golf buddy and perpetual yes man. I simply nodded, gathering my materials with deliberate slowness. Every fiber of my being wanted to explain that his boss, the VP of operations, had already approved my strategy. That the clients had specifically praised my innovative approach. That the numbers spoke for themselves, but something in me knew that silence was more powerful in this moment. As I organized my folders, I noticed Tara, the head of marketing, watching me with a curious expression. She'd witnessed Davidson's tactics before, usually followed by swift resignations or, for those who stayed, perpetual sidelining. Her slight nod was almost imperceptible. But I caught it. "We'll reconvene next week," Davidson announced, already standing to signal the meeting's end. "Derek, stay behind so we can discuss transition plans." The room emptied quickly, everyone eager to escape the lingering tension. I was the last to leave, deliberately taking my time. As I reached the door, Davidson called out, "Peyton." I turned, face neutral. "I hope this doesn't discourage you," he said, not sounding hopeful at all. "We all have to recognize our limitations." I smiled, not a nervous smile, not a forced one, but the kind of smile that made him pause. "Of course, Mr. Davidson. Recognizing limitations is indeed important. For everyone." Something flickered across his face, uncertainty, perhaps. He hadn't expected this reaction. He'd wanted to see me crumble, to prove his power. Instead, he got calm acknowledgement that somehow felt like a subtle warning. I closed the door quietly behind me and walked steadily down the hallway, past curious eyes peering over cubicle walls. The whispers had already started, another victim of Davidson's public executions. But unlike those before me, I wasn't heading to the bathroom to cry or to my desk to update my resume. Instead, I walked straight to my office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. The promotion letter from Regional Director Collins sat in my inbox, alongside the project approval he'd already signed off on. Davidson didn't know about either. The announcement wasn't scheduled until next month. He'd just publicly undermined a decision his superior had already made. I sat back in my chair, the initial shock giving way to something colder, more focused. For 4 years, I'd worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove my worth to a man who saw me as a threat rather than an asset. I wouldn't be making that mistake again. I pulled out my phone and sent a brief text to my partner. Dinner might be late tonight. Something came up at work. Then I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. Not a resignation letter, something far more valuable. Davidson had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. I hadn't always been Davidson's target. When I first joined Meridian Solutions, I was just another eager analyst with something to prove. I remember my first week, staying until midnight reorganizing quarterly reports that Davidson had casually mentioned could use improvement. He'd seemed impressed then, even clapped me on the shoulder and told the team I was one to watch. That was 4 years ago. For years of arriving first and leaving last. For years of solving problems no one else could crack. For years of watching Davidson take credit for my ideas in executive meetings while I sat silently in the background. I stared at my computer screen, the document now filled with dates, projects, and outcomes. The Westlake proposal that saved the company's biggest account, my strategy, Davidson's presentation. The cost-cutting initiative that earned him a company award, my late-night analysis, his name on the report. The innovative client portal that became our competitive edge, my design, somehow transformed into Davidson's vision by the time it reached the board. My phone buzzed with a text from Tara. "You okay?" That was brutal. I typed back, "I'm fine. Just interesting timing with Colin's decision." 3 dots appeared, then, "Davidson doesn't know, does he?" Apparently not. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair. The signs had been there from the beginning if I'd been willing to see them. The way Davidson's enthusiasm for my work cooled as others began to notice it. How he'd call on everyone else in meetings before reluctantly turning to me. The accidental exclusion from emails about projects I'd initiated. IT started changing 8 months ago when I landed the Mackenzie account, a client Davidson had been chasing for years. I'd proposed a completely different approach than his traditional pitch, and they'd loved it. The congratulatory email from the CEO had gone company-wide. Davidson had smiled tightly in the hallway afterward and said, "Lucky break, Peyton. Don't let it go to your head." After that, he'd started assigning me impossible deadlines, excluding me from crucial meetings, forgetting to share vital information until the last minute. Classic sabotage techniques, all while maintaining a facade of supportive management. What he didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. A habit from my first job: keep records, save emails, note conversations. Not out of paranoia, but professional thoroughness. I never thought I'd need it until I did. I opened my drawer and pulled out the promotion letter, signed by Regional Director Collins just last week. The position was a newly created role, Director of Strategic Initiatives, reporting directly to Collins, not Davidson. The official announcement was scheduled for the end of the month, after the Archer project launch, the very project Davidson had just publicly declared me not good enough to lead. I slid the letter back into my drawer as a knock sounded at my door. It was Melissa, Davidson's assistant. "Mr. Davidson wants the Archer files transferred to Derek's drive," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "All of them." I smiled politely. "Of course. I'll take care of it." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "He also wants your access restricted starting tomorrow." I'm supposed to tell IT. For years of dedication, and he couldn't even wait a day before erasing me from my own project. "Thank you for letting me know," I said calmly. After she left, I turned back to my computer and began methodically copying files, not to Derek's drive, but to my secure cloud storage. Not the sanitized versions Davidson had seen, but the complete records, my original concepts, client communications, the documented changes Davidson had demanded that had nearly derailed the project before I quietly fixed them. I wasn't stealing, every file had my name on it, every concept had originated from my work. I was simply securing what was mine, and my phone buzzed again. This time it was Collins, heard about today's meeting. Davidson went off script. "Let's talk tomorrow, 9 a.m. I typed back a simple "I'll be there," then continued organizing my files. The thing about Davidson was that he'd grown sloppy over the years, comfortable in his position, convinced of his untouchability. He didn't think anyone would challenge him, especially not me, the reliable workhorse who always smiled and said, "Yes, sir," no matter how unreasonable his demands. That was his first mistake. His second was forgetting that I hadn't spent 4 years at Meridian building just projects. I'd built relationships with clients who specifically asked for me, with vendors who trusted my judgment, with colleagues who came to me instead of him to solve problems, and most importantly, with people like Collins, who had seen my work and recognized its value, even when Davidson tried to minimize it. Davidson had publicly declared war today. He just didn't realize he was already surrounded. I stayed at the office until 10 p.m. that night, long after Davidson had left for his standing Thursday evening golf game. The empty floor gave me the privacy I needed to think, to plan, to prepare. Most people would have stormed out. Some might have fired off an angry email. Others would have immediately run to Collins to complain. All emotional reactions. All exactly what Davidson would expect, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I wasn't going to give him any ammunition to paint me as unstable or unprofessional. Instead, I pulled up the company's shared drive and began downloading. For years of projects, for years of emails, for years of documentation that told a very different story than the one Davidson had presented today, I created a folder labeled Professional Development and began organizing everything chronologically. The Westlake proposal, my original draft, and Davidson's revised version that was nearly identical. The client retention strategy I developed that had mysteriously appeared in Davidson's quarterly presentation. The innovative approach to the Turner account that Davidson had initially rejected as too risky before presenting it as his own breakthrough idea 3 weeks later. Pattern after pattern emerged as I worked through the files. It wasn't just about taking credit. It was systematic. Any time I gained visibility with upper management, Davidson would find a way to isolate me. Anytime a client specifically praised my work, my role would be mysteriously reduced on the next project. I pulled up the salary database, normally restricted, but I had temporary access from when HR had asked me to help analyze departmental budget allocations last month. The numbers told their own story. Derek, with 2 years less experience and consistently lower performance metrics, made 30% more than me. The other team leads, all men who'd been hired after me, started at higher salaries than I was making now. I saved screenshots, then carefully logged out of the system. Next, I pulled up my personal project, the client management platform I'd been developing on my own time. Davidson had dismissed it as unnecessary when I'd proposed it last year. Now it was nearly complete, built nights and weekends, solving the exact problem our biggest clients had been complaining about for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Tara, Bailey's down the street. Drink? Several of us here talking about today. I considered it for a moment, then replied, not tonight. Working on something important. Your funeral tomorrow, she wrote back with a skull emoji that I smiled. More like a resurrection. I turned back to my screen and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, Strategic Integration Initiative, Maximizing Client Relationships Through Technological Innovation. This wasn't just about defending myself against Davidson. This was about the opportunity his mistake had created. Collins' message made it clear. Davidson had gone off script, which meant the executive team had a different assessment of my abilities than Davidson had presented today. His public undermining of me had exposed a disconnect in leadership, a disconnect I could use. By midnight, I had crafted a comprehensive presentation that addressed the exact challenges the company was facing. Challenges I knew intimately from 4 years of working directly with our clients. My platform wasn't just a side project anymore. It was the solution Meridian needed to maintain its competitive edge. I would not be presenting this as a defense against Davidson's claims. I would be presenting this as the natural evolution of my role in the company, the perfect demonstration of why Collins had already decided to promote me. I packed up to leave. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Davidson to Derek, copied to the entire team except me. Derek, looking forward to your leadership on the Archer project moving forward. Set up transition meetings with Peyton for anything relevant before her reassignment. I've restricted her system access as discussed. I should have felt angry, but instead, I felt something close to pity. Davidson truly believed he had won. He thought he was sidelining me, eliminating a threat to his position. He had no idea that he had just accelerated his own downfall. I shut down my computer and gathered my things. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I would meet with Collins. Not as a victim seeking protection, but as an executive presenting solutions. Davidson had publicly declared me not good enough. I wouldn't waste energy trying to convince him otherwise. I would simply prove it to everyone else. I walked to my car in the empty parking garage. I thought about Davidson's face at that morning's meeting, the smug certainty. The barely concealed satisfaction as he thought he was putting me in my place. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to step aside and let him destroy himself. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's success. The next morning, I arrived at the office at my usual time, 7:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Davidson typically strolled in. My meeting with Collins wasn't until 9 o'clock, which gave me time to prepare. I dressed deliberately that day. My charcoal suit with the subtle pinstripe, the one I reserved for client presentations. Professional. Confident. The outfit of someone who belonged in the executive suite. I settled at my desk. My email pinged with a calendar invitation from Davidson. Project transition meeting, 9 a.m. The exact time of my scheduled meeting with Collins. Not a coincidence. I declined without explanation and continued reviewing my presentation. At 7:45, Melissa arrived, startled to see me already at my desk. "Oh, Peyton." I thought. She stopped herself, clutching her coffee cup tighter. "Mr. Davidson asked me to clear out the project files from your drive this morning." I smiled pleasantly. Already taken care of. I transferred everything to the shared drive last night. What I didn't mention was that I'd also documented every file's original creation date, my authorship, and the revision history. Digital breadcrumbs that could not be erased. "Oh, that's efficient," she said, clearly surprised by my cooperation. "Also, Derek wanted to know if you could brief him before the transition meeting. He seems nervous." I nodded understandingly. "Derek's welcome to stop by any time." I knew he wouldn't. Derek had avoided direct conversation with me for months, preferring to communicate through Davidson or emailed. By 8:30, the office was filling up. Colleagues glanced my way, then quickly averted their eyes. They expected to see defeat. Instead, they saw me working calmly at my desk as if yesterday had never happened. Tara stopped by, coffee in hand. "You look suspiciously put together for someone who got publicly executed yesterday." I shrugged. "Proper burial attire." She narrowed her eyes. "You're up to something." "Just doing my job, as always." "Right," she said, unconvinced. "Well, Davidson's been in his office with Derek all morning. Drawing up battle plans, I assume." "Good for them," I replied, checking my watch. "Would you excuse me? I need to prepare for a meeting." I gathered my materials and headed toward the elevator, not to the conference room where Davidson had scheduled our transition meeting, but up to the executive floor. On the way, I passed Derek heading to the bathroom, his face pale with stress. He'd been thrown into the deep end with no preparation. Davidson had chosen him not for his capabilities, but for his loyalty. Another mistake. When the elevator doors opened at the executive floor, I stepped out with purpose. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Morning, Peyton. Director Collins is expecting you." As I walked down the hallway, I spotted Davidson exiting another executive's office. He froze mid-stride when he saw me. "Peyton," he said, recovering quickly. "What are you doing on this floor? We have a transition meeting scheduled." I met his gaze evenly. "Good morning, Mr. Davidson. I have a meeting with Director Collins." His expression tightened. "Collins? What about?" "I believe he wants to discuss yesterday's presentation." I kept my tone neutral, professional. Davidson's eyes narrowed. He thought he understood what was happening, that I was running to Collins to complain, exactly as he'd expected. His lips curled into a slight smirk. "Well, don't let me keep you," he said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Though I should mention I've already briefed the executive team on your performance issues." I simply nodded and continued walking, feeling his eyes burning into my back. Let him think he'd won. Let him believe his narrative was secure. Inside Colin's office, the regional director was reviewing documents at his desk. He looked up as I entered, gesturing to the chair across from him. Peyton, thank you for coming. His expression was unreadable. I heard about yesterday's meeting. Rather surprising, considering our conversations last week. I placed my presentation folder on his desk. I thought you might want some context. He raised an eyebrow, opening the folder to find not complaints about Davidson, but my complete strategic initiative with implementation timeline. This is comprehensive, he said, scanning the executive summary. I believe it aligns with the company's growth objectives we discussed, I replied. And it demonstrates exactly why the new position makes strategic sense. Collins studied me with new interest. I hadn't come to point fingers. I hadn't come to defend myself. I had come prepared to move forward. Davidson seems to have concerns about your readiness, Collins said carefully. I met his gaze directly. With respect, sir, I believe the results speak for themselves. Perhaps we should review them together. As we began going through the numbers, client retention rates, project ROIs, team performance metrics, I could see the shift in Colin's expression. He hadn't expected this level of preparation. He hadn't expected data instead of drama, and as our meeting extended past the scheduled 30 minutes, I knew Davidson was downstairs, waiting for me to appear at his transition meeting, growing increasingly frustrated by my absence. Sometimes the most powerful move is the one your opponent doesn't see coming. My meeting with Collins ran 45 minutes longer than scheduled. By the time I returned to my floor, Davidson was pacing outside his office, face flushed with barely contained anger. Derek hovered nearby, looking increasingly uneasy. There you are, Davidson snapped as I stepped off the elevator. We've been waiting for over an hour. I kept my expression neutral. I apologize for the delay. My meeting with Director Collins ran long. And what exactly was so important that you had to miss a direct instruction from your supervisor? His voice carried across the open office, drawing attention from nearby cubicles. Before I could respond, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Mackenzie Harris, CEO of our largest client account. Excuse me, I said to Davidson. I need to take this. His face darkened. No, you need to, Mackenzie. Good morning, I answered, turning slightly away from Davidson. Yes, I have those figures ready for you. Davidson stood frozen, unwilling to create a scene while I was speaking with such a high-profile client. I walked calmly to my office, closing the door behind me. I received your proposal this morning, Mackenzie said. I'm impressed with the direction. When can we meet to discuss implementation? I'd be happy to walk you through it. Would tomorrow work for your schedule? Perfect. And Peyton, I want to be clear that we want you leading this. Last time, Davidson tried to step in, and frankly, it didn't go well. I smiled to myself. Understood, Mackenzie. I'll make sure the right team is assembled. As I ended the call, I noticed Davidson watching through my office window, his expression calculating. He knocked once before entering without waiting for a response. The Mackenzie account is being transferred to Derek, he stated flatly. You'll need to brief him immediately. I leaned back in my chair. That might be difficult. Mackenzie specifically requested that I lead the implementation. We have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Davidson's eye twitched. You don't schedule client meetings without approval. Actually, Collins approved it during our meeting this morning. He thought it made sense given my history with the account. Davidson's confidence wavered visibly. He hadn't expected Collins to be involved in day-to-day account assignments. What exactly did you discuss with Collins? He demanded. Primarily the strategic initiative I've been developing. He was quite interested in the client retention statistics. Davidson's face paled slightly. Those statistics clearly showed that accounts under my management had 40% higher retention rates than the department average, including those managed by Davidson himself. That information wasn't meant for Director Collins. I finished for him. Strange. The quarterly reports are available to all executives. I assumed you'd included them in your briefing about my performance issues. Davidson's mouth tightened. He was starting to realize his miscalculation. By trying to sideline me publicly, he'd forced me to accelerate plans I might otherwise have kept quiet. The Mackenzie meeting, he said finally. I'll be attending as well. Of course, I replied smoothly. Though you should know they've requested the meeting take place at their offices. Collins has already approved my travel request. Another blow. Davidson rarely left the office for client meetings, preferring to assert dominance by making them come to him. Now, I would be representing the company at their headquarters without his direct supervision. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. This doesn't change anything, Peyton. You're still being reassigned after the transition period. I nodded respectfully. I understand, Mr. Davidson. I'm just focused on serving our clients effectively until then. After he left, I opened my email to find a message from Collins, sent company-wide. Please join me in congratulating Peyton Miller on securing the expanded Mackenzie contract. This represents a 30% increase in our largest account and demonstrates the innovative client service that defines Meridian Solutions. Peyton will be presenting her approach at next week's executive meeting. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Within minutes, congratulatory messages began flooding my inbox, including several from executives who had witnessed Davidson's dismissive treatment the day before. By mid-afternoon, the office dynamics had subtly shifted. Colleagues who had avoided eye contact that morning now stopped by with questions or comments. Derek looked increasingly uncomfortable each time someone mentioned the Mackenzie account, and Davidson stayed in his office with the blinds drawn. At 4:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Tara. Executive floor has been buzzing all day. What did you do? I replied simply, my job. She sent back a wide-eyed emoji, followed by, drinks tonight? I want details. Can't. Preparing for Mackenzie meeting tomorrow. As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed a meeting invitation appear on my calendar from Collins, Strategic Planning Committee, weekly meeting. The committee consisted of directors and vice presidents, not managers like me. A separate email followed moments later. Peyton, given your expanded role with key accounts and your strategic initiative presentation, I'd like you to join these discussions moving forward. Davidson has been informed. I glanced across the floor to Davidson's office. He was still there, staring at his computer screen, jaw clenched. He had tried to publicly diminish me, to put me in my place. Instead, he had only highlighted the contrast between his assessment and my actual value to the company. The first domino had fallen. Now I just needed to wait for gravity to do the rest. The Mackenzie meeting was just the beginning. In the 3 weeks that followed, the ground continued to shift beneath Davidson's feet, and he knew it. I arrived at the office earlier, stayed later, and maintained meticulous documentation of everything. Not out of desperation, but strategic necessity. Davidson was watching for any misstep, any opportunity to reassert control. I gave him none. The Mackenzie implementation proceeded flawlessly. When their CFO emailed the entire executive team praising the refreshing approach and attention to detail, Collins forwarded it company-wide. My inbox flooded with congratulations, including several from executives who had never acknowledged my existence before. Davidson's response was predictable. He tried to insert himself into the project. I'll need daily briefings on Mackenzie, he announced, appearing at my office door one morning. And I should be included on all client communications moving forward. I nodded agreeably. Of course. I've set up a shared folder with all documentation and added you to the email distribution list. What I didn't mention was that the shared folder also automatically notified Collins and the executive team of all updates. If Davidson tried to alter anything, there would be a record. The Strategic Planning Committee meetings proved even more effective than I'd anticipated. Seated at the table with directors and VPs, I had opportunities to showcase my knowledge that would have been impossible while filtered through Davidson. During the third meeting, the conversation turned to customer acquisition costs. We're still seeing higher than industry average turnover in the mid-market segment, the VP of Sales noted, frowning at the quarterly report. Davidson immediately jumped in. We're implementing new retention strategies this quarter. Actually, I said, opening my laptop, I've been analyzing this pattern for the past 6 months. The issue isn't our retention strategy, it's our onboarding process. I shared my screen, displaying a detailed analysis that showed a clear correlation between initial implementation timeframes and client satisfaction scores. Clients who experience delays or communication gaps during the first 60 days are 70% more likely to terminate within 18 months. I've developed a streamlined protocol that addresses these critical touchpoints. The room fell silent as executives reviewed the data. Even Collins looked impressed. "Why hasn't this been brought up before?" the CEO asked, looking directly at Davidson. Davidson shifted uncomfortably. "It's a relatively new analysis. I was planning to review it before presentation." "It's dated 3 months ago," the CFO observed. Squinting at the timestamp, I remained silent, letting the implications speak for themselves. After the meeting, Collins asked me to stay behind. "That analysis, it's exactly what we've been missing. I want you to lead the implementation of your protocol across all accounts, effective immediately." I felt Davidson stiffen beside me. "That would require restructuring team assignments," he objected. "It's a significant undertaking." "Then it's fortunate we have someone who's already done the groundwork," Collins replied, nodding at me. "Peyton, draft a transition plan and we'll review it next week." As we left the executive floor, Davidson walked silently beside me to the elevator. When the doors closed, leaving us alone, his facade finally cracked. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, voice low, undermining me with the executive team, making me look incompetent. I met his gaze directly. "I'm simply doing the job I was hired to do, Mr. Davidson. Identifying problems and developing solutions. You deliberately withheld that analysis from me. Actually, I submitted it to you on March 15th. I have the email receipt. You replied that it was unnecessary and overreaching. Would you like me to forward you the exchange?" The elevator doors opened, revealing a corridor full of colleagues. Davidson forced a tight smile and walked briskly to his office without another word. The next day, my security badge unexpectedly granted me access to the executive floor without escort, a privilege typically reserved for directors and above. The message was clear. My status had changed. Later that week, I discovered Davidson had scheduled a meeting with our second-largest client, without including me, despite my role as primary account manager. I didn't protest. Instead, I emailed the client directly with some additional information they'd requested, casually mentioning how much I was looking forward to our upcoming quarterly review the following month. Their confused response came within minutes. "We thought you wouldn't be managing our account anymore? Davidson said you were being reassigned." I forwarded the exchange to Collins with a neutral message, "Some confusion about account management I thought you should be aware of." The response was swift. By afternoon, Collins had issued a formal clarification to all major clients, confirming my continued role as strategic account manager and introducing my expanded responsibilities. Davidson's retaliation grew increasingly desperate. First, he tried restricting my system access again, only to have IT inform him that my clearance now required executive approval to modify. Then he attempted to exclude me from department meetings until Collins began asking why I wasn't present. Each maneuver backfired more spectacularly than the last. Davidson, once untouchable, was flailing. The final blow came unexpectedly. The company had been preparing a presentation for our annual industry conference, typically Davidson's moment to shine in front of peers and competitors. During the review meeting, our CEO studied the materials with a frown. "This feels outdated," he said. "We need something that showcases our innovative approach." All eyes turned to me. "Peyton," the CEO continued, "your client protocol has exactly the fresh perspective we need. Would you be willing to present it at the conference instead?" I felt Davidson's stare burning into me as I nodded. "I'd be honored." When the meeting ended, the VP of marketing approached me. "We'll need your bio and headshot for the conference materials," she said. "You'll be representing Meridian as our featured speaker." Davidson didn't even attempt to hide his fury as he stormed out. That evening, as I prepared to leave, I found a company-wide email in my inbox. "Please join us in congratulating Peyton Miller on her promotion to Director of Strategic Client Solutions, effective immediately. Peyton has consistently demonstrated exceptional leadership and innovation, particularly with our key accounts. In this new role, she will report directly to Regional Director Collins." I gathered my things calmly, ignoring the curious glances and whispered conversations around me. As I waited for the elevator, Tara appeared at my side. "So," she said, eyes wide, "drinks are non-negotiable tonight. You have explaining to do." I smiled, watching the elevator numbers descend. "Actually, I think everything has explained itself." She shook her head in disbelief. "Davidson looks like he's about to explode." "That's unfortunate," I replied as the doors opened. "But as they say, we all have to recognize our limitations." The week following my promotion was deceptively quiet. Davidson avoided direct interaction, keeping to his office with door closed. But I wasn't naive enough to believe he had accepted defeat. Men like Davidson don't surrender power gracefully, they lash out when cornered. I spent the time preparing for the industry conference, refining my presentation on our new client protocol. The event was highly publicized, with attendees from every major company in our sector. It would be my first appearance as a director, representing Meridian on a national stage. 3 days before the conference, Davidson finally made his move. I arrived at work to find Derek waiting anxiously by my office. His usual smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by genuine concern. "You need to check your email," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Davidson sent something to the executive team at midnight. About your presentation." I nodded calmly, though my pulse quickened. "Thank you, Derek." Inside my office, I found what Davidson had been working on during his conspicuous silence: a detailed critique of my client protocol, identifying supposed flaws and potential risks, concluding that it was dangerously untested and potentially damaging to client relationships. He had sent it to every executive, board member, and the conference organizers. A second email had arrived an hour later from the conference director. "In light of these concerns, perhaps we should discuss alternative presentation topics." A third email from Collins, my office, 9 a.m. I took a deep breath and opened my presentation file. Davidson's strategy was clear: create last-minute doubt, force me to defend rather than present, diminish the impact of my promotion, and undermine my credibility just as I was stepping into the spotlight. IT was desperate, transparent, and exactly what I had been waiting for. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked into Colin's office with a tablet and small stack of folders. Davidson was already there, looking simultaneously triumphant and aggrieved. "Peyton," Collins gestured to a chair. "I assume you've seen Davidson's analysis." "Yes," I replied, taking a seat. "I've prepared a response." Davidson leaned forward. "This isn't about responses. This is about preventing a potential disaster. The protocol hasn't been properly vetted." "Actually," I interrupted calmly, sliding a folder across the desk to Collins, "the protocol has been in limited implementation for 3 months. Both men stared at me. "With the Mackenzie account," I continued, "and the Westlake Group, and Archer Technologies, our 3 largest clients." Collins frowned, opening the folder. "I don't recall approving a pilot program." "It wasn't positioned as a pilot," I explained. "When Davidson rejected my initial proposal, I integrated key elements into our standard service delivery for select accounts. The results are in that folder: a 32% improvement in client satisfaction metrics and 0 implementation delays." Davidson's face flushed dark red. "You implemented this without authorization?" "I implemented improved communication protocols within my role as account manager," I corrected. The quantifiable success of those improvements informed the comprehensive strategy one later presented to Director Collins. Collins studied the data, expression unreadable. These results are significant. They're manipulated. Davidson snapped. She's cherry-picking metrics to make herself look good. I turned to him with a measured gaze. The analytics were run by the independent assessment team you personally selected last quarter, Mr. Davidson. Are you suggesting they falsified reports? Collins raised an eyebrow, waiting for Davidson's response. Davidson shifted tactics. The point is, she circumvented normal channels. Went behind my back. That kind of insubordination shows initiative, Collins finished. Especially when initial proposals are dismissed without proper review. He closed the folder decisively. The presentation will proceed as planned. Davidson wasn't finished. At least let me review the final materials. As her former supervisor, Collins emphasized the word, "Your input has been noted." But as Peyton now reports directly to me, I'll handle any final approvals. Dismissed. Davidson sat frozen, watching as Collins turned his attention to me. Send me your presentation by end of day. And Peyton, good work on the implementation metrics. Very thorough. I nodded. Thank you, sir. As we left Collins' office, Davidson stepped into the elevator with me. When the doors closed, he finally snapped. You think you've won, he hissed. But this isn't over. The board still values my experience, my track record. One presentation won't change that. I met his gaze directly. You're right, Mr. Davidson. The presentation won't change anything. His eyes narrowed, suspicious of my agreement. Your actions already did, I continued quietly. The moment you decided I wasn't good enough, you set all of this in motion. The elevator doors opened at our floor, but Davidson remained rooted in place, staring at me as I stepped out. I never needed to fight you, I said, turning back as the doors began to close. I just needed to let everyone see exactly who you are. I walked away as the elevator doors sealed shut on his stunned expression. That afternoon, I received a company-wide email from the CEO himself, confirming my role as Meridian's presenter and expressing full confidence in Director Miller's innovative approach to client management. Davidson had played his final card and lost. The next morning, his office was empty, his nameplate removed. No announcement, no explanation. He had simply disappeared. Tara found me at the coffee machine, her eyes wide. Davidson's gone. Resigned effective immediately. I stirred my coffee slowly. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate, she echoed incredulously. It's a miracle. What happened? I shrugged slightly. I imagine he recognized his limitations. Sometimes the most complete victory isn't delivering the final blow yourself, but creating circumstances where your opponent has no choice but to surrender. 1 year later, I stood at the head of the conference table, watching as my team presented their quarterly results. The room looked the same as it had that day, the day Davidson had publicly declared me not good enough, but everything else had changed. I occupied Davidson's former office now, though I'd redecorated immediately. Gone were the imposing dark furniture and closed blinds, replaced with a glass-walled space filled with natural light. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was effective. Client retention is up 47% from this time last year, Melissa, now my executive assistant, reported, advancing to the next slide. The implementation protocol has been adopted company-wide with remarkable consistency. I nodded, watching the executives around the table. The same faces that had witnessed my humiliation were now leaning forward, engaged and approving. Collins caught my eye from the head of the table and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. And the expansion into the European market? He asked. I gestured to Derek, who sat up straighter. The pilot program exceeded projections by 22%. We're on track for full implementation by Q3. Derek had surprised everyone, including himself. Once freed from Davidson's shadow, he'd proven to be innovative and collaborative. He'd been my first recruit when I rebuilt the team. Excellent work, everyone, I said as the presentation concluded. Let's reconvene next week to discuss the Q3 strategy. As the room cleared, Collins lingered. The board was impressed with the quarterly numbers, he said. Your name came up several times during the leadership discussion. I smiled. I'm glad the team's hard work is being recognized. Not just the team, he replied meaningfully. The VP of Strategic Development position opens next month. I've recommended you. Another promotion. Less than a year after I'd sat in this very room, enduring public humiliation. I appreciate your confidence, I said simply. After Collins left, I remained at the table for a moment, looking at the space where I'd once sat, stunned and silent, as Davidson had tried to diminish me, and my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Speaking of Davidson, I hadn't heard much about him after his abrupt departure. There had been rumors that he'd been asked to resign, that the board had finally reviewed his management history, that several complaints had mysteriously surfaced after my promotion. I neither confirmed nor denied my knowledge of these developments. The notification showed he'd finally landed at a smaller firm across the country. 3 positions in 12 months, each less prestigious than the last. His LinkedIn profile now described him as a senior consultant, the corporate equivalent of starting over. I closed the notification without responding. His career trajectory was no longer my concern. As I walked back to my office, I passed the cubicle where Tara now managed our marketing initiatives. She glanced up with a knowing smile. Saw Davidson's update, she said. Karma's quite the overachiever, isn't it? I shrugged lightly. People usually end up exactly where they belong. Later that afternoon, I reviewed applications for our management training program, a new initiative I'd launched 6 months earlier. The program specifically recruited candidates with non-traditional backgrounds and diverse perspectives, people who might have been overlooked in Davidson's rigid hierarchy. My assistant knocked lightly on my open door. Your 4 o'clock is here. The new client from Montreal. I stood, straightening my jacket. Send them in. As I prepared to greet the potential client, I caught sight of a small frame on my credenza, the only personal item visible in my office. It wasn't a photo or an award, but a simple quote I'd had printed the day after my promotion. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. The new client entered, hand extended. Director Miller. I've heard impressive things about your approach. I smiled, gesturing to the conference room. We're looking forward to showing you what we can do. As we walked, the client mentioned casually, I believe I knew your predecessor. Davidson? We weren't impressed. I nodded noncommittally. Meridian has evolved significantly since then. So I've heard. That's why we're here. The meeting proceeded smoothly, the client clearly impressed with our presentation. As we concluded, they asked the question I'd been anticipating. What would you say is the key difference in your leadership approach compared to your predecessor? I considered my answer carefully. I could have mentioned Davidson's failings, his aggressive management style, his habit of taking credit for others' work. I could have subtly highlighted the contrast between his declining career and my rapid rise. Instead, I smiled. I believe in building people up, not tearing them down. Success is never about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always good enough. After the client left, I returned to my office and looked out over the city's skyline. Somewhere out there, Davidson was likely still telling himself that he'd been right about me, that my success was luck or manipulation or office politics. I no longer cared what he thought. The truth was, Davidson's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating me. It had been underestimating the power of his own words that day. When he declared me not good enough, he hadn't created my downfall, he'd catalyzed my determination. My phone buzzed with a text from Collins. Board unanimously approved your VP promotion. Announcement next week. I smiled, remembering the promotion letter that had been sitting in my desk drawer that fateful day. The one Davidson never knew about when he tried to diminish me publicly. In the end, I hadn't needed revenge. I hadn't needed to destroy him or expose him or humiliate him in return. I had simply needed to rise, and in doing so, I created the contrast that made his fall inevitable. The company holiday party was the following week. As I circulated among colleagues and executives, I overheard snippets of conversation about the upcoming year, the new initiatives, the positive culture shift. Quite different from last year, the CFO commented, joining me at the edge of the room. Remember Davidson's speech? All those veiled threats about performance reviews and budget cuts. I nodded. Things change. He raised his glass slightly. For the better in this case. The board has noticed the difference in morale. In results. I have an excellent team, I said. You have excellent leadership, he corrected. Sometimes the right person in the right position changes everything. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the year that had passed. Davidson had tried to become an obstacle in my path, never realizing he was actually a catalyst. His public humiliation had been meant to diminish me, to put me in my place. Instead, it had simply shown me exactly where I belonged.